The alarm bells rang through the military base at exactly 3:27 a.m., cutting through the silence like a knife. Private Maya Jackson rolled out of her narrow bunk, her heart already racing before her feet hit the cold concrete floor. Around her, the other soldiers were scrambling to get dressed, grabbing their gear with practiced speed that came from months of training and real missions. Maya moved slower than the others, her hands shaking slightly as she pulled on her boots. She could feel the familiar weight of disappointment settling on her shoulders as she watched her fellow soldiers move with confidence and purpose. For the past 6 months, ever since she had arrived at Forward Operating Base Thunder, she had been the weak link in every operation, the one who held everyone back. Sergeant Michael Kane stood in the doorway of the barracks, his stern face illuminated by the harsh fluorescent lights. His voice boomed across the room as he called out orders. "Listen up, people. We have reports of enemy movement 2 clicks south of our position. Intelligence suggests they're planning an attack on the village of Riverside at dawn. We move out in 15 minutes. Maya felt her stomach drop. Another mission, another chance to prove that everyone was right about her. She had joined the military with dreams of making a difference, of being a hero like her father had been. But reality had been much harsher than her dreams. During training exercises, she was always the last to complete obstacle courses. In combat simulations, she froze up when the pressure got intense. Her marksmanship scores were barely passing, and her physical fitness tests put her in the bottom 10% of her unit. The other soldiers had stopped trying to hide their frustration with her. Private Tom Williams, a tall guy from Texas with a sharp tongue, made it clear what he thought of her. "Jackson's going to get us all killed one day," he would say loud enough for her to hear. "Why don't they just send her home already?" Even worse were the whispered conversations she caught pieces of. "Dead weight," they called her. "A liability." The words cut deeper than any physical wound could have. As Maya gathered her gear, she noticed that Corporal Lisa Park was checking her equipment with unusual care. Lisa was one of the few soldiers who had never been openly cruel to Maya, though she had never been particularly friendly either. She was known for being thorough and professional, someone who followed orders without complaint and got the job done. "Park," Sergeant Kane called out, "you're staying behind to monitor communications. We need someone reliable on the radio." Maya saw the disappointment flash across Lisa's face, but the corporal simply nodded. "Yes, sir." "Jackson," the sergeant continued, his voice carrying a note of resignation, "you're with the supply convoy. Stay in the rear and keep your head down." It was the same assignment Maya always got. Stay back, stay safe, stay out of the way. She wanted to protest, to demand a chance to prove herself, but she knew it would only make things worse. Instead, she nodded silently and followed the others out into the pre-dawn darkness. The convoy consisted of 3 heavily armored vehicles loaded with supplies for the village of Riverside. Maya sat in the back of the last truck, surrounded by boxes of food, medical supplies, and ammunition. The driver, Specialist Jake Murphy, was a quiet guy who rarely spoke to anyone. He had been driving supply runs for 2 years and had a reputation for getting through dangerous territory without incident. As they drove through the rocky terrain, Maya stared out at the landscape bathed in the pale light of early morning. The mountains rose up around them like sleeping giants, their peaks touched with gold from the rising sun. It should have been beautiful, but all Maya could think about was how many places an enemy could hide in those rocks and shadows. The radio crackled to life with Sergeant Kane's voice. "Alpha Team, this is Kane. We're approaching the village now. No sign of enemy activity. Looks like our intel might have been wrong." Maya felt a small surge of relief. Maybe this would be one of the easy missions, the kind where they delivered supplies and returned to base without incident. She had been through enough difficult situations to appreciate the quiet ones. But her relief was short-lived. At exactly 7:15 a.m., the peaceful morning was shattered by the sound of gunfire echoing across the valley. The radio exploded with frantic voices as Kane's team came under attack. "We're pinned down in the village square." Kane's voice was tense but controlled. "Heavy fire from multiple positions. They were waiting for us." Maya's heart began to race as she listened to the chaos unfolding over the radio. She could hear the sharp crack of rifle fire and the deeper boom of explosions in the background. This was exactly the kind of situation she had always feared, the moment when her weakness would matter most. "Base, this is Kane," the sergeant continued. "We need immediate support. They've got us surrounded." Back at the base, Corporal Park's voice came through clearly. "Kane, this is base. Reinforcements are 20 minutes out. Can you hold your position?" There was a long pause before Kane responded, and when he did, his voice was strained. "Negative, base. We're taking heavy casualties. Johnson is down and Williams is hit bad. We need to extract now." Maya felt something cold settle in her stomach as she heard Tom Williams' name. The same Tom Williams who had called her dead weight was now wounded and in danger. Despite all the cruel things he had said, she found herself genuinely worried about him. "Murphy," she said to the driver, "we need to get closer to the village. They need help." The specialist shook his head firmly. "Orders are to stay back, Jackson. We're not combat troops." But Maya was already reaching for the radio. "Sergeant Kane, this is Jackson. What's your situation?" Kane's voice was sharp with irritation even through the static. "Jackson, get off this frequency. This is not your concern." "Sir, I'm with the supply convoy. We have medical supplies and ammunition. If you can get to an extraction point, we might be able to help." There was another pause filled with the sound of gunfire. When Kane spoke again, his voice was different, more desperate. "Jackson, we're trapped in a building on the east side of the village. The enemy has the main roads covered. There's no way you can get through." Maya looked around the truck at the supplies surrounding her. Food, medicine, ammunition, everything the trapped soldiers needed. For the first time in months, she felt like she might actually be able to do something useful. "Sir," she said into the radio, "what if we created a distraction? Draw their fire away from your position." "Absolutely not." Kane's response was immediate and firm. "Jackson, you are to stay with the convoy and await further orders." But as Maya listened to the ongoing firefight, she realized that following orders might not be enough this time. The reinforcements were still 15 minutes away, and from the sound of things, Kane's team didn't have 15 minutes. She made a decision that would have seemed impossible to her just hours earlier. "Murphy, I need you to drive me to the village." The specialist looked at her like she had lost her mind. "Jackson, are you crazy? That's a direct violation of orders." Maya felt a strange calm settle over her, different from the panic she usually felt in crisis situations. "Maybe, but if we don't do something, those soldiers are going to die." Murphy stared at her for a long moment, then shook his head. "I'm not risking my life for your hero complex, Jackson. We stay here." Maya understood his position, but she also understood that she couldn't live with herself if she did nothing while her fellow soldiers died. She grabbed her rifle and started loading her pack with medical supplies. "What are you doing?" Murphy asked, though the answer was obvious. "I'm going on foot," Maya replied, checking her weapon with movements that felt automatic despite her racing heart. "You can stay here or you can help me, but I'm not sitting here doing nothing while they're under fire." As she prepared to leave the truck, Maya realized something had changed inside her. The fear was still there, but it was no longer paralyzing her. Instead, it was sharpening her focus, making her think more clearly than she had in months. She slipped out of the truck and began moving toward the village, using the rocky terrain for cover. The sound of gunfire grew louder as she got closer, and she could see smoke rising from several buildings in Riverside. Maya's training kicked in as she moved from rock to rock, staying low and checking her surroundings constantly. She had never been the fastest or the strongest soldier, but she had always been good at staying hidden. Now, that skill might be the difference between life and death. As she got closer to the village, she could see the tactical situation more clearly. The enemy had positioned themselves in buildings around the main square, creating crossfire that prevented Kane's team from moving. They were effectively trapped in what looked like an old school building. Maya keyed her radio, keeping her voice low. "Sergeant Kane, this is Jackson. I'm approximately 200 meters from your position. Can you give me the enemy locations?" The response came back immediately, filled with anger and concern. "Jackson, what the hell are you doing? I ordered you to stay back. Sir, with respect, I'm here now. I can see 3 enemy positions from my location. If I can get to that water tower on the north side, I might be able to provide covering fire. There was a pause during which Maya could hear Kane discussing something with his remaining men. When he came back on the radio, his voice was grim but resigned. Jackson, listen to me very carefully. This is not a training exercise. These people are trying to kill us. If you're going to do this, you need to be smart about it. For the next 5 minutes, Kane walked Maya through the tactical situation, pointing out enemy positions and safe routes of movement. It was the first time he had ever spoken to her like she was a real soldier instead of a burden. Maya made her way to the water tower, moving carefully through the shadows cast by the early morning sun. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure the enemy could hear it, but she forced herself to focus on each step, each breath, each moment. When she reached the base of the water tower, she realized she would have to climb up the metal ladder to get a good firing position. Heights had always terrified her, but she pushed the fear aside and started climbing. Each rung brought her higher above the village, giving her a better view of the battlefield below. From her position near the top of the tower, Maya could see everything. Kane's team was holed up in the school building, with enemy fighters in at least 4 different locations around the square. The main group was in what looked like a restaurant across from the school, but there were also snipers in the bell tower of a small church and fighters positioned behind overturned cars. Maya took careful aim at the restaurant where most of the enemy fire seemed to be coming from. She had never been the best marksman in her unit, but all those hours of practice were about to be put to the ultimate test. She fired her first shot at 8:32 a.m., and the sound echoed across the village like thunder. The bullet struck the wall next to one of the fighters, sending chunks of concrete flying. It wasn't a hit, but it got their attention. Suddenly, several of the enemy fighters turned their weapons toward the water tower, and Maya found herself under fire for the first time in her life. Bullets struck the metal structure around her, sending sparks flying and filling the air with the sharp ping of metal on metal. But instead of freezing up like she had always done in simulations, Maya found herself moving with purpose. She shifted position on the tower, using its structure for cover while returning fire. Her second shot was better, catching one of the fighters in the shoulder and sending him sprawling. "Jackson, good shooting," Kane's voice came through the radio, filled with something Maya had never heard from him before, approval. "Keep their heads down, we're going to try to move." Over the next 10 minutes, Maya maintained steady fire on the enemy positions, forcing them to take cover and reducing the pressure on Kane's team. She wasn't hitting many targets, but she was changing the dynamics of the battle, giving her fellow soldiers the opening they needed. She watched as Kane led his remaining men in a fighting retreat from the school building, moving from cover to cover toward the edge of the village. 2 of them were carrying the wounded Tom Williams between them, and Maya could see that Kane himself was limping badly. But just as it looked like they might make it to safety, disaster struck. A new group of enemy fighters appeared from the south, cutting off their escape route. Kane's team was now caught in the open with nowhere to go. Maya realized that if she didn't do something, they would all be killed. She made another decision that the old Maya never could have made. She climbed higher on the water tower, exposing herself to enemy fire, and began shooting as fast and as accurately as she could. Her rifle barked again and again as she laid down covering fire, forcing the new group of enemies to take cover and giving Kane's team precious seconds to reach safety. But her exposed position made her a target for every enemy fighter in the village. Bullets whined past her head and struck the tower all around her. One grazed her left arm, sending a line of fire across her skin, but she kept shooting. Another shattered the metal rung just below her feet, nearly causing her to fall. "Jackson, get out of there," Kane's voice was urgent over the radio. "You're too exposed." But Maya knew that if she moved now, her team would be caught in the open again. She stayed at her position, continuing to provide covering fire even as the enemy concentrated their efforts on bringing her down. At 8:47 a.m., she saw Kane and his remaining soldiers reach the relative safety of the rocks at the edge of the village. Tom Williams was still alive, though he needed medical attention urgently. They had made it, but only because Maya had been willing to put herself in harm's way. As soon as she saw that her team was safe, Maya began her own retreat from the water tower. But as she climbed down, she realized that the enemy had figured out her position. They were moving to surround the tower, cutting off her escape routes. Maya found herself trapped just as Kane's team had been trapped minutes earlier. The irony wasn't lost on her. In trying to save her fellow soldiers, she had put herself in the same dangerous situation. But then she heard the most beautiful sound in the world, the roar of helicopter engines approaching from the north. The reinforcements had arrived, and they were coming in fast and low. The helicopters opened fire on the enemy positions with devastating effect, their machine guns and rockets turning the village square into a storm of destruction. The enemy fighters, who had been so confident moments before, suddenly found themselves outgunned and surrounded. Maya took advantage of the chaos to complete her descent from the water tower and make her way toward the extraction point. Her left arm was bleeding from the bullet graze, and her legs were shaking from the adrenaline, but she was alive. She reached Kane's position just as the helicopter landed to evacuate the wounded. Tom Williams was unconscious but breathing, and Kane's leg wound was serious but not life-threatening. As the medics worked on loading the casualties, Kane grabbed Maya by the shoulder. "Jackson," he said, his voice hoarse from shouting orders, "that was some of the bravest damn fighting I've ever seen." Maya looked at him in surprise. She had expected anger for disobeying orders, not praise. "Sir, I just did what needed to be done." Kane shook his head. "No, you did more than that. You saved our lives, all of us." As they lifted off in the helicopter, Maya looked down at the village below. The enemy fighters were either dead, wounded, or fleeing into the mountains. The mission had been successful, but more importantly, all of her fellow soldiers were going home alive. Back at the base, word of Maya's actions spread quickly through the unit. The same soldiers who had called her dead weight were now looking at her with something approaching respect. Tom Williams, recovering from his wounds in the medical facility, asked to speak with her. "Jackson," he said when she visited him, his voice weak but sincere, "I owe you an apology and my life." Maya felt tears welling up in her eyes, but she forced them back. "You don't owe me anything, Williams. We're all on the same team." Over the following weeks, Maya found that everything had changed for her. She was no longer assigned to supply runs and rear guard duties. Instead, Kane began including her in combat operations, treating her like any other soldier in the unit. Her confidence grew with each mission, and her performance improved dramatically. Corporal Park approached her one evening as Maya was cleaning her rifle in the armory. "You know," Lisa said, "I always thought there was more to you than people gave you credit for." Maya looked up from her weapon. "What do you mean?" Lisa sat down across from her. "I've been watching you for months. You were never the fastest or the strongest, but you were always the most careful. You paid attention to details that others missed. You just needed the right situation to show what you were really made of." As Maya reflected on Lisa's words, she realized that the corporal was right. She had always been different from the other soldiers, but different didn't necessarily mean worse. Her caution, her attention to detail, her ability to think clearly under pressure, these weren't weaknesses. They were strengths that she had never learned how to use properly. The mission at Riverside became a turning point not just for Maya, but for the entire unit. They began to work together more effectively, supporting each other's strengths and covering for each other's weaknesses. Maya found herself becoming a leader in small ways, offering insights and suggestions that helped make their operations more successful. Sergeant Kane pulled her aside one day, 3 months after the Riverside mission. "Jackson, I've been thinking about what happened that day. You saved my life and the lives of my men, but more than that, you showed me something about leadership that I had forgotten." Maya waited for him to continue. "Leadership isn't about being the loudest or the strongest or the fastest," Kane said. "It's about being willing to do what needs to be done, even when it's scary, even when people doubt you. You've got that quality, Jackson. Don't ever lose it." As Maya looked back on that morning at 3:27 a.m. when the alarm bells had awakened them all, she realized how much had changed. She was no longer the weak link, the dead weight that held everyone back. She had found her place in the unit, her purpose as a soldier. But more than that, she had learned something important about herself. Courage wasn't about not being afraid. It was about being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. She had been afraid every step of the way during the mission at Riverside, but she had acted despite her fear. The other soldiers in the unit still remembered her as the person who had struggled during training, who had been last in almost everything. But now they also remembered her as the soldier who had climbed a water tower under enemy fire to save her teammates. Both versions of Maya were true, but the second one mattered more. Maya Jackson continued to serve with distinction, earning promotion and recognition for her service. She never became the fastest soldier or the strongest fighter, but she became something more valuable, a soldier her teammates could count on when things got dangerous. The girl who had once been dismissed as dead weight had become the one who saved lives when it mattered most. And in doing so, she had saved herself as well, finding the courage and strength that had been inside her all along. Years later, when Maya told the story of that day at Riverside, she would always remember the exact moment when everything changed. It wasn't when she climbed the water tower or when she opened fire on the enemy positions. It was when she made the decision to leave the safety of the supply truck and help her fellow soldiers, despite her fear and despite her doubts about herself. That decision had made all the difference, not just for the soldiers she saved, but for the soldier she became.